My talk today is basically joint operations from the operating room to the battlefield, life of a citizen sailor. What I'm going to try to give you is a general idea of what it's like sort of balancing a couple careers and family, and then periodically going off on deployments, and then eventually going off to war and preparing for that, and then doing what I do in a similar way in the battlefield as I would at home. Anyway, my talk obviously doesn't represent the Department of Defense or the United States Navy. There's no classified material, John, right? You asked that question. And then there are some slides here that may be a little bit graphic because they're from combat injuries. I try to be sort of conscientious about some people's understanding about that. So I've limited them. But I'll tell you, the inspiration behind this talk kind of comes from two sources. I had this Amherst, this was about 2 years ago, winter 2014, and I actually, we all have morbid curiosity, so we look at the obituary section, right? We do that. I read through it. It started with 1940 to somebody in like 1955, and 12 of the first 15 people had served in the military. That was Army, Navy, and Marines. The Air Force hadn't been adapted yet for most of those folks. And that was part of my inspiration, just that the fact that I don't think the representation of the military life is really well done here. And so I hope to give you a flavor of that. Now, my father went to college here. That's my father up there in the upper left, and obviously he was an inspiration to me, class of 1960. He served on CB-31, which is the USS Bonhomme Richard, which is a conventional aircraft carrier. He served in the early 60s, right before Vietnam. If you look up in the upper right-hand corner, father's last commanding officer, and his name was George Morrison. And if you see the kid next to him, that was his son. His son was named Jim Morrison. And you all know who Jim Morrison was, right? He didn't follow in his father's footsteps. I sort of did in my own, but that was interesting. My dad remembers that picture from the bridge when young Jim was visiting from Berkeley at that time. Anyway, this is dedicated to a lot of the people who've served in the military, and especially those who've made the ultimate sacrifice. We'll talk about briefly my education, how I sort of got to where I am. Started up here in the upper left is my experience here at Amherst, and you see I took education very seriously. Up in the upper right is medical school. Down here is the Hospital for Special Surgery, Cornell University in Manhattan, and that's a picture from Afghanistan. And you will notice, even though this looks kind of serious here, we're standing with a world-renowned spine surgeon who we elected as our best educator during our class. But you can see that we're all wearing shorts there. You don't do that in New York City, especially when you're at the Hospital for Special Surgery. But when we were residents there, we had to wear these ice cream uniforms. We had short white consultation coats and white slacks, and we had our names stitched in the rear end here and our names stitched on here. We had to wear those. So it was sort of our way of sort of getting back at everybody is we're going to graduate in shorts made from those same shorts that they made us wear, or the same outfits. So that was getting back. Now, my early joint experience goes back a long time. When I was 6, 7 years old, I was diagnosed with a condition called Legg-Calvé-Perthes disease, which is a condition that affects your hip. And you've seen Forrest Gump. That was my brace there in the center that I wore for 2 years, and that's me over on the right with my older brother in our St. Bernard. But that gave me sort of the determination to try to succeed in everything in life, that history. When I came to Amherst College, joint operations were kind of thought of mostly at places like Chi Psi. That's where most of the joint operations were occurring while we were here at Amherst College. Chi Phi, I'm sorry, Chi Phi. It was not Chi Psi. That's it. Yep. Y'all remember that too. Y'all remember that. Anyway, thereafter I went to the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, to the Hospital for Special Surgery, and then currently I'm the Chief of Staff-elect here at Alvarado Hospital. And in the medical world, we always talk about seeing one, doing one, teaching one. So my entry into joint replacements obviously began when I started to see it in medical school, and I started to do them in residency, and now I'm teaching. I actually have a resident physician from Mexico actually learning with me right now. Now, in my daily practice, this is the kind of thing I do. I do a lot of joint replacements, a lot of sports medicine. Many of you have seen the movie Any Given Sunday. It's a movie about football players and stuff. Well, we call it Any Given Monday. In fact, this is a professional football player, retired. His son is actually a current professional football player. And what you can see here is he's got trash knees on both sides. The right one has a lot of metal and hardware in it. The left one didn't, but the left one's the first I replaced last year. So a lot of the things I do in practice are restoring mobility to people and doing that kind of surgery. Jim, the other things? There's a question already.
Could you slow down a little
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me explain why I talk fast, because I'm from New York and we talk fast. So I always get that.
Some of us are even older than you.
Gotcha. All right, I'm going to turn it down. I get that all the time because I live in San Diego, California, and California is a very slow, kind of relaxed place. So we'll go a little slower and accommodate the wishes. So again, other operations that I do are things like total hip replacement, and you can see that one over here. So you see this patient here with a bad, let me make sure I got pointer, bad arthritis on the right hip or left hip, and then you see it replaced there. So these are the kind of things I do in my regular practice of medicine. We're now getting into robotics and computers in surgery. I'm going to briefly give you a sense of what we're doing nowadays with it. We don't have guys like this yet in the operating room, but we're starting to get machines like this little robot here, and I'll show you another picture of it, that are starting to do parts of the operations for us. And we're using computer navigation that assists us in knowing exactly where things are in space, so we can make more perfect bone cuts and do a more precise operation. This is happening in lots of fields of medicine, but I speak to it as an orthopedic surgeon doing a lot of this with joint replacements. This is an example. What you're looking at below, you'll see this move. This is actually a little robot that we attach to the patient's femur. And you just see how it's moving around and actually performing these bone cuts. So what we do in surgery is we actually use this device here to make a knee that's bent like this. We call that varus or bow-legged, to make it nice and straight. And this, called kinematics here, just shows you that when you have a knee like this that's bent, and it shows you that you're a varus or bent deformity of 10 degrees off, that you can then make it straight. And what this says is 0 degrees right down the center. So we're actually using the computers to more precisely put an implant in such that the forces are balanced equivalently across that implant. This is kind of hard to see, but here's the bent knee right here, and here's the straight knee. What you're trying to do is make the center of the hip balance and go straight through the center of the knee and go straight through the center of the ankle. That makes a perfectly balanced knee replacement. So we're now using the computers to do that kind of thing in the operating room. And we're using little robot devices to actually assist us in making some of these bone cuts. And quite honestly, orthopedics is very much like carpentry. We're trying to do really precision work, and our medium is not, it's not clay, it's not wood, it's bone, human bone. The thing that we learn in medical school is maybe not to hurt those important structures like arteries and nerves and veins. But what we do mechanically is very much like precision carpentry. Okay? Now I'm just going to sort of give you the other half of my education. After I actually finished up with medical school, I got into the Navy. I went to flight school in Pensacola, learned how to fly. I'd already had a private pilot's license at the time. So I learned how to fly the Bell Jet Ranger, which is kind of like your standard CBS News helicopter. And then we went down here and we played in things like the Hilo Dunker and all these things that sort of challenge you as far as what happens when your aircraft crashes into the water, how do you survive. And then I also went on to dive school a few years afterwards down in Panama City. So Pensacola, Florida, Panama City is where our dive school was. If you ever saw the movie Men of Honor, this is the school. It used to be in Bayonne, New Jersey. Then it was moved down to Panama City. And there we learned how to get beat up by instructors. What we would do is we called this sharks and minnows. It's kind of like the Navy SEAL workout too. You're diving down here with your tanks and stuff, and then from the surface come these instructors, and they'll come down at you and they'll attack you and literally rip your regulator out, trash all your gear, and you cannot fight back for 20 seconds. Once that 20 seconds is over, you're allowed to square away your gear and then start breathing again. But what they will actually do is not only pull your regulator, your breathing device, out of your mask, but they'll tie your hoses and tubes. They're ripping everything apart, and they beat you up pretty hard, slamming your head in the bottom of the pool. And then you have time to put all your gear back together. The only way you can fail is if you let go of your tanks. So no matter what you do when they attack you, hold on to your tanks. And the SEALs do that in training too, and I'll get that in a little bit. This is called a Mark 21 for the people who dive on oil rigs and do deep sea diving. This is where we learned how to dive this type of device. It's very cool. It's a surface supplied diving rig that you're literally walking on the seafloor. If you saw the old movies with the big copper helmet, that was called the Mark 5. This is the latest version of that. Laurel was in my flight class. She died on the Columbia reentry in 2003. And again, I put a few people up here because it's Memorial Day and I want to remember some people that are important. I got into Marine Corps aviation after I did my flight school, and I was assigned a helicopter squadron in the West Coast. That's why we were the original West Coast choppers, even though Jesse James claimed it, but we were the original ones. This is my squadron. We flew what are called Super Cobras. They are AH-1 attack Cobras. And then we also flew the Bell Huey, the UH-1 Huey. That was Hilo Marine Light Attack 169. I spent 3.5 years with them. Flew all over the world, did some great missions, met some great people. When I completed my orthopedic residency and my in New York City, and then was coming back to San Diego, I took some time off and went to that Navy dive school. After I learned how to dive all the different rigs and looking for a job on the reserve side, I was beginning my private practice in orthopedic surgery. I got into the Navy SEAL teams, particularly SEAL Team 5, and I worked with them for about 7 years. We did everything, you know, we shot guns, we took care of the BUDS guys who were the new trainees to become SEALs. We dove kind of neat rebreather rigs. This is called the Draeger. It's a closed circuit rebreathing rig that basically, I know Trish was talking the other day about, they have Sodazorb, and there's a canister in there that scrubs out the carbon dioxide as you're breathing. So the system is purely oxygen fed. This is an oxygen bottle down here, and you breathe pure oxygen, and it cycles out the CO2, so you can swim as long as that Sodazorb continues to take the CO2 out, and as long as you have oxygen in the bottle. So you can actually dive in this device for about 6 hours. You can't go deep with it for different reasons. We call it partial pressure of oxygen and different, basically technical hazards with it. But it's a lot of fun to dive, and it's very quiet. No bubbles making noise. A lot of stealthy kind of stuff. So in the SEALs, we dive a lot of that, a lot in the rig here. Chris Mueller was in my unit, and he was the first one that went off to Afghanistan, and he unfortunately got killed by a sniper there in 2001. But I remember him today as well. I got more seriously into the Navy's diving routine, and I did an operation in 2006, and this was called a submarine escape, and I'll describe it in a little bit more detail here. We did this in Alaska in December. That's me actually coming out of the water after getting off a submarine. I'll describe what we dove in, this special type of suit we used. This is the USS Los Angeles. It was the first of a class of an attack submarine, the 688 class, and this is in Alaska. You can see the beautiful mountains behind us here. Submarine Development Squadron 5 was our parent command at the time. And so what we basically did is, and this is a graphic of the submarine itself. Inside a submarine, you have two big trunks here. This is called your main escape trunk, and this is your rear escape trunk. Submarine's divided into two sections, this particular class. The forward section is most of the living spaces, the people, weaponry. The rear spaces are all your engineering plant, your nuclear reactor and such. Anyway, if you need to get off a submarine in an emergency and it's at a relatively safe depth to do it, what you can do is you can put that suit on, and I'll show you that suit in a second. You can climb up into the trunk, which is up here. It's the escape trunk, which I showed you up here. This is looking up into it from below inside the submarine. This is below. This is up into the escape trunk. And then what effectively happens is that the trunk is flooded, and you're on a high-pressure air source with this suit. And as the trunk loads up on and you'll see it happen now. This is us getting out of the submarine in a second. But once that trunk floods up, there's a quick pressurization sequence because we're at 130 feet. And so it's like literally taking a cement block and diving off a boat and diving down 130 feet. And you can imagine the pressure change that you get from that. Well, it happens within seconds inside that trunk. And actually, that's what the trunk looks like inside. Okay, there's black in there. And all of a sudden, there's pressure and heat coming onto you. And what's going to happen is at a certain time, the pressure inside that trunk is going to equalize to the outside pressure of the submarine. The hatch is going to pop, and you're going to go screaming to the surface. You have no other breathing device on you except the air that's in that suit. Okay, and I'll show you that suit in a second. You don't have scuba bottles, you don't have Draegers, you have nothing. This is what it looks like coming off the submarine. Hopefully we'll see this. We had cameras set up when we did this operation to validate, but the hatch pops, and then there's two guys in this trunk, and you can start to see them coming out. And you're going pretty darn fast, too. 10 seconds to the surface. Okay, now if you're a diver, you know that if you go 10 seconds to the surface from 100 and some odd feet, you're going to die. Simply going to die because you're going to get what's called an arterial gas embolism. Okay, so what you got to do when you're doing this, you got to breathe out the entire time. You got to keep your airway open, otherwise you will die. And it's simple as that. So then we come up to the surface and we are in our little fancy suit here, and you can see this little package right here that actually is a life raft. The system is designed, you get off the submarine, you come screaming up in the suit. This is the suit again. You unzip your hood. The suit has some insulations, but it's very thin. The suit actually is almost contained in that simple little suitcase. And so you can store these on the submarines, so in the event of an emergency, everybody grabs their little suitcase, puts their suit on, then you start cycling people through that trunk to get them off the submarine. You pop to the surface, you open up your life raft, and in theory, you're home free. In theory. Okay.
Breathing out the whole time.
Yeah, breathing out the whole time. And again, it was when I came off that submarine, I tell you, it was an absolute pleasure looking down and seeing this big black hulk underneath me and knowing I got out of it, because being stuck inside it, if you were to come off your air source, you got nothing to breathe. So you've got to go, and you've got about 70 pounds of positive buoyancy pushing you up. So you go really quite fast. So it's quite a ride. It's quite a rush. Just breathe out. Don't get so freaked out. So we train our submariners down in Groton, Connecticut on these devices in a special tower to use this system in the event that they are in a submarine that you need to get out of for whatever reason. So after that, I become a sub-disaster action hero. This device back here is a submersible that we use to, in another fashion, rescue somebody off a submarine. Okay, it works a little bit differently. What this does, and here's a picture of it here off the coast of Norway. This is called our pressurized rescue module. Here's a sort of graphic depiction of it. This device, in the event that you have injured people or the submarine is way too deep to do an escape, you can send this submersible down. It has a special locking hatch that locks onto the submarine, and then the submariners can actually get off and climb up into this device, and this goes back up to the surface on this crane. The beautiful thing about this device is you can keep the patients or the submariners under pressure the whole time, which if you're a diver and you're in a sunken submarine, you might understand that if the pressure is built up in that submarine, you're becoming a diver because you're getting nitrogen absorbed into your system. So you can't just pop to the surface with one of those suits if that's the scenario. You've got to be rescued. This was our old system. This was called the DSRV, Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicle. This one, you remember on that movie Red October, they transferred some folks on one submarine to the other one on the DSRV. It works in a similar fashion, but this is the modern version, and this one's surface tethered. Some of the other fancy things we have is called an atmospheric diving suit. That's Master Chief Petty Officer Dan Jackson, one of the finest divers in the Navy. And this is what is called our submarine rescue bell. This is the only thing that actually has been used in a real rescue. In 1939, the USS Squalus was off the coast here of Portsmouth and sunk, and they were able to rescue a good portion of the crew using this rescue bell, and that was 1939. We still use that for a close, a not deep rescue, something between 800 feet and closer to the surface. This can go down to 2,000 feet, and it's actually can probably go down to 5,000 feet, but it's been tested to 2.
How many people do each of those devices?
This will carry 16 passengers, and there's 2 people that are driving it. This guy had less. It had like about 10 or 12, and 2 people driving it. This one also can last longer because it's surface supplied with power, and this one was battery powered. So once it got to the surface, you had to change out the batteries or recharge it. So this was what the Navy went to. Now this system is designed to fly it anywhere in the world, attach it to the back of a ship, and use a host nation ship or somebody else's ship. And that gets us into our next thing. We do all these rescue practice missions with all the different navies of the world that wish to participate. Off the coast of Norway, we actually had the Russians. And this was the Russians' atmospheric diving suit, which you can see they had theirs painted black. This is a Russian submersible, their rescue submersible. And in fact, my command rescued the Russian submersible that was stuck in the bottom of the Bering Sea in 2005 by using a remote operating vehicle to cut one of these loose. It got entangled in some cabling below. The U.S. Submarine Rescue Command was actually activated, flew into Russia for the first time since World War II, and brought rescue systems to help these folks out. And so the Russians thereafter started to come and participate in these rescue exercises, which they're not really classified. They're really open to anybody who wishes to participate, and any country that wishes to have their hatches evaluated to see if we can mate our systems to their hatches can actually participate and learn how our systems can help save their submariners if they were to go down deep. Russians love to drink vodka. After you spend a day of doing submarine rescue, you're back up there drinking vodka with the Russians. I did some specialized diving operations down here. This is the Aquarius. It's off the coast of Key Largo. It's one of the coolest places to dive I've ever been. Basically, this is a big tube that you live in underneath the sea, on the sea floor. So there's a big tube going this way, and this is a little well deck or wet deck, and you actually come in here, you pop your head up into basically a bubble of air. And since the system is pressurized, we have people living down here for about a week or two at a time, doing saturation diving missions. So I spent 2 times down there covering these missions. And greatest diving, there's big grouper down here that are underneath the surface, and you get to live down here. There's communications up to the surface via this buoy and electronic communications. Very cool. Unfortunately, on my second time down there, we had a NOAA diver who had a problem with a rebreather rig and unfortunately died down there. So it shut down operations for a time, but he was Dewey Smith, the next Navy corpsman, who was a NOAA diver at the time. Back to a little naval aviation. Before I actually went to Afghanistan, I was assigned to Gila Marine Sea Combat Squadron 85. And this was a combat squadron that supported Navy SEALs and special operations. So we do things like spy rigging and fast roping, which is getting people on and off helicopters real quickly. This was HSC 85 Signal. Our sister squadron, we lost one of our guys when I was in Afghanistan. This is Landon Jones. This is his family. My kids still do karate with one of his 2 sons. But again, remembering him today in Memorial Day weekend. On the civilian side, the military isn't always out there doing wartime operations or doing, submarines and helos. We do a lot of civic action such, and MedCaps are called Medical Civic Action Programs. This one was in Cambodia. So you start taking care of Cambodians. Sometimes they're based on one of our big ships like the Mercy here. Other times I was on land. I flew into Phnom Penh and spent a couple weeks there basically taking care of the local population. It's that hearts and minds type mission. And you get to see some very unusual pathology like goiters and elephantiasis that you don't really see here in the United States anymore. So it's a really eye-opening experience. And you can provide these people with some real hope. On the civilian side, I do them as well. So here's one that I was not doing with the military, but I was doing in Guatemala. I'll show you, I'm even doing plastic surgery down here. See the big growth on this lady's ear? I do a little plastic surgery, even though I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Sometimes we can't help somebody. This is a sarcoma. It's a malignant tumor that I couldn't do anything for. She really needed her arm amputated and probably needed much more aggressive surgery after that. But a lot of weird lumps and bumps we take off in these missions, and they're kind of fun and they're extremely rewarding. The people just love you after we do these missions. And these Guatemalans are really cute. And the area we went is Huehuetenango. This is their traditional dress. Everybody in the town dresses this way. Todos Santos dress. If you dress this way, it means you're from Todos Santos. It's just a way that those people in those areas dress. This is the only non-Guatemalan here. That's my son. I put him into the outfit when he got home. But I'll tell you, as far as medical missions, this is some of the most rewarding stuff you do because the patients just absolutely love you when you do simple things for them. Back in San Diego, again, I met my current wife. Took her out with SEAL Team 5 once and showed her how to shoot a machine gun. She kind of liked that, and eventually got married and have a few kids and live in beautiful San Diego. Petco Park here. We love to sail. This is Glorieta Bay at a Coronado Yacht Club. That's my son, that's my daughter, and there they are again. So the family life becomes a very important and integrated part that you try to balance with all these other cool things you do, but this is also a very cool thing. I'll give you some perspective on that right now. One day in, I think, the fall of 2012, you get one of these notices that says you're involuntarily ordered to report for active duty. Okay, this is called mobilization. I've been a reserve, I've been deployed as a reservist, but only for short periods of time, like maybe a month at the longest. But now I'm being asked to go away for potentially a year. And again, it's part of my job, so you get your stuff together and you go off to war. Hippocrates is the one that said, he who desires to practice surgery must go to war. And that's probably because a lot of the advances in a lot of things we do in medicine, prosthetics, orthotics, robotics, comes from things that we learn on the battlefield. And we'll get to that in a minute, because this is kind of the heart of my talk. But before you go to war, you got to go and redo all your combat skills training. So I got to go to beautiful Fort Dix, New Jersey, got to put on all my armor gear and all that, got to get out in the ranges and qualify again in this case is an M4, learn how to use your gas masks, learn how to not to trip these things off and blow you and your buddies up. This was an interesting device back here, but it's a simulated truck that rolls upside down, and you're in there with all your gear, and then when you're upside down, you're trying to get out with an additional 60 pounds of gear and your rifle on you, and it's pretty harrowing to try to climb upside down when you have your buddies, one of them actually weighed about 250 pounds at the time, came crashing down on me, and it gets to be interesting. But you learn all these things before you go off to war, and I got to compliment the Army. Their training was quite good to get us prepared to go over. We did some Marine Corps training too, up at Camp Pendleton thereafter for different reasons. But once we're put together in our units, we go off and we become what's called a forward surgical team. And because we're surgeons going to a battle, that was our motto, bringing a knife to a gunfight. We were surgical team 4509, and we were headed off to a place in Afghanistan. And so this is a wonderful C-5 Galaxy, beautiful big plane. Actually, you can see them flying around over here, some yesterday. This is everybody cruising out over the Hindu Kush Mountains, kind of the northern part of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Everybody's sleeping except this one guy here. That one guy didn't make it through the deployment either, I'll tell you that. So he probably should have slept on the plane over. But otherwise, it's not first class by any means, but that's how they get us there. And there's all our gear up in the back there. You get there, and we flew into Kandahar. And Kandahar is not such a really rough place. There's TGI Fridays and Kentucky Fried Chicken. But we're not going to Kandahar. But Kandahar was built up like a small city by the time I got there. This was called the Boardwalk. And the Boardwalk was all these little shops and things all arranged in a nice area around some playing fields. The hospital there was as good as any community hospital we have in the United States. But I wasn't going there. But it was nice to kind of drop through there on the way there and see how luxury was at wartime. So then we get in these things. These are called Chinooks if you're an Army person. We fly up in the Chinooks, and sometimes Mi-17s. They had Russian helicopters flying us around Afghanistan as well. But this is us coming back into what's called Forward Operating Base Apache. And now we're in the real war zone. So these are called HESCO barriers. These are all blast walls. And these are our basic transportation around the area. That's aerial transportation. So that's how we get there. And you welcome to a beautiful FOB Apache. And they kept the sign really well maintained for us. And this is called a HESCO barrier. And you'll see razor wire on the top of these. And what these are is the guy who designed these is brilliant. But it's basically just canvas with chicken wire, and it comes closed up, and you open it up and put a lot of dirt in it. It makes the most quick and fast, incredible barrier to fire from RPGs, rockets, whatever may be shot at you. So in Afghanistan, we are way over here by the Pakistani border, outside of Kandahar, in what's called the Zabul province, down in that area there at Forward Operating Base Apache. It was basically an Army forward operating base that was being utilized by U.S. Army, Romanian Army, and then we had a smattering of Lithuanians, Jordanians, different nations. We had the Afghan Army next to us on one side. We had Special Operations, U.S. Special Operations next to us on the other side. The interesting thing about this place we went to is the city is called Kalat. Kalat in the old language there means castle. This castle here was apparently built by Alexander the Great's army as they came through here only almost 2,500 years before. And you wonder why we're still fighting these wars in these places, but this is the crossroads of Central Asia. And so this place has had known war since its existence. And here we are in the middle of it, and this is my base looking over towards the Kalat Castle that Alexander built. This is my team here. Our facility is, again, behind blast walls. I had about 25 folks. Most were Navy. I had 3 Air Force folks. We were the only Navy people on this huge Army base with the exception of our SEALs on one side, and there was 1 engineer from the Navy as well. This is our triage tent, and this is our facility that the Seabees built when they came through. Plywood structure reinforced with wood frames, not great for blast protection. And we actually lived in these kind of tents here. So everybody down in Kandahar has these great blast shelters and stuff. Well, we had tents. And then everybody else is driving around in these guys. And these are called MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. And they've got all kinds of stuff to protect people from throwing stuff at it to blowing them up. They have a V-shaped bottom, so if you roll over an explosive, it tends to blow it out. However, we had some casualties that this still blew that thing up. We called our little facility the Miranda Trauma Center after Dennis Miranda was a Navy SEAL killed 2 years earlier on a mission right out of our facility. So we named it in honor of him. This is what the inside of our surgical facility looks like. We have 1 operating table here, 1 over here. In the front of the facility, and I'll show you in a minute, we have a triage area, and then we have a pre-triage area. But it's not long before you show up that the Black Hawks are coming in, and you see the little Red Cross here and Red Cross here. So they land at the airfield right next to us here. We zip around the blast walls, pick up the patients, and bring them to our facility. and they start coming through the system. So they're typically coming in via these ambulances after we pick them up off the aircraft, and then we bring them in because they still may have grenades, weapons, all kinds of combat gear on them. So we bring them into our triage tent first, strip them out of their gear. For those who have done medicine, trauma naked, you get all their gear and stuff off. I'll go back 1 second here. Into this area here where we make sure that they're safe. So we're still wearing some of our protective gear here until the patients are safe and ready to come inside our facility. And then once they come inside, we've got this triage bay, which can hold up to 3 beds at one time. And that's where we start our real interventional stuff. And then you start to see what you see in the battlefield, and sometimes what you never thought you'd see in the battlefield. I mean, this is a musket ball. It's like a half-inch musket ball, something that you would typically see in the 18th and 17th century. But they put anything and everything inside of explosive devices to create as much damage as possible. But I thought this was kind of interesting just to see this, us taking a musket ball out of somebody. So here it is alongside their thigh here. That's their femur bone. There's the musket ball there, and there it is right there. This one here, you can see a stone. You can see the stone here on the x-ray, and then you see the stone here. And anytime like a device goes off, whether it's an explosive, a rocket-propelled grenade, it shoots all the rocks, and there's rocks everywhere out there. And these things come in big and small sizes, and they get embedded in everybody. And you find them in every place you can imagine. And so you end up picking a lot of these things out surgically. Here's one in somebody's head. And actually, this patient did quite well. We didn't have a neurosurgeon where I was, but down at Kandahar they did. So if I had a neurologic injury like this, we stabilize them, we put them on a helicopter, and 45 minutes later they're down in Kandahar where there's a neurosurgeon to take this out of their brain. Okay, that patient actually did quite well in spite of that injury. Weapons. We treated a lot of Afghan Army guys too, and they don't wear the same protective armor we got. So we saw all the standard combat wounds, abdominal wounds, chest wounds, extremity wounds that some of our guys taking care of only U.S. casualties didn't get to see. So here you see, this is an AK-47 standard issue weapon that you'll see out there. Shoots a 7.62 caliber bullet. This one went screaming through this patient's abdomen. I'm surprised it's still inside of him. It might have bounced off something to lose some of its energy before it ended up in him. You bring these people in, they're going right to surgery. Usually you don't even take the x-ray. They're right into surgery because you got to stop the bleeding that's hemorrhaging and causing them just about to die. So these organs, if you can recognize them, that's a spleen with a gunshot wound right through it, and that's a kidney with a gunshot wound right through it. So to enable us to save a life, you got to take out what's bleeding, and if you can't do it there, you pack it off and you protect him as much as you can, and then get him down to Kandahar to the next echelon of care. RPGs, very, very common weapon out there. So this is what an RPG looks like. It's a grenade that's basically attached to a rocket that shoots that grenade off, and then that thing blasts around a patient, or a future patient, I should say, but a militant, and they get all kinds of injuries. And you'll get shelled with shrapnel, and they get these horrific injuries. And then we as surgeons, we try to stabilize their limb, make sure that they have a good blood flow to their limb to save the limb, and then we put these devices called external fixators on them. And I'll show you a picture of these, but these allow you just to stabilize the fracture beneath, then to work on vessels to save the vascularity to the limb, and then treat the other injuries. Sometimes people go walking about and they step on a landmine. So landmine blows off under somebody's foot, and this is not a normal foot for those of you who know anatomy. This bone here should be attached up here. So the whole foot literally gets blown up, and it gets worse as the charge is greater, but this is a horrible injury. I didn't even show you the picture of it. It was so dirty to look at it, but you can see the architecture of the foot is so out of shape. And then when I do a reduction, it actually looks okay here. And then I put one of these devices on here. It's like an erector set. It's got metal bars and pins that screw into the bones, and then you align those and you stick them into the bones, and you put this thing together to stabilize the internal structure. It's called an external fixation device. This is another RPG type injury. Again, the same type of thing. This is a femur bone or thigh bone. Gets blown apart. We put an external fixator above and below the fractured area, and then you've got to open up and clean out the injured area, clean out the debris, and in some cases you've got to do more heroic surgery to tie off blood vessels, or even divert or make temporary shunts to blood vessels. This is another external fixator, and the reason I show this picture, it's kind of gross, but there's a lot worse that I could show you, believe me. But when we treat these ugly, dirty combat injuries, you've got to release what's called compartments. Compartments are sort of a containment of the deep tissues that surround the muscles, that if they aren't released, the pressure builds up so much inside them that the blood flow can't get through. And the limb will die from a compartment syndrome. So it's routine after you clean up these wounds that you do these big, ugly incisions throughout the extremities, above and below, wherever there are injuries, to open up these compartments to release the pressure, save the limb. So there's that kind of stuff. This is a gunshot wound to the hand. Doesn't look so bad, but when you get inside, and I'm doing this surgery, we call this a spaghetti wrist, because everything is everywhere, and you can't tell, blood vessels from nerves from tendons. You can if you're a surgeon, but honestly, it's a mess. You're trying to, there's a whole bunch of tendons in your wrist and hand, believe me, and I'm trying to figure out which one goes to which and connect them back together, and then sewing a vessel together to get vascularity back to the hand. So we end up doing some pretty interesting stuff that I wouldn't be doing in regular practice. And then the real heroic stuff is stuff like this, where you're cracking open somebody's chest. That's a heart right there. And you're doing open cardiac massage, or actually plugging a hole in a heart. Many of these patients were Afghans, although we had some U.S. casualties we had to do this to as well. But very heroic. This is my trauma surgeon here, University of Connecticut trained. He actually works down the road here in Hartford. My vascular surgeon from Johns Hopkins, and here's my anesthesiologist who was active duty in the Navy. One more here. This is the example of a gunshot wound, goes to the thigh. You can't really see it here, but I couldn't control the bleeding from the back as I explored it. So we had to turn the patient over and open up and explore his femoral artery here, which is the big blood vessel that serves the whole limb. And we had to tie off the deep branch of that, which goes to the back of the leg, to save this guy's life. So sometimes you just can't control it from where you're looking at it, and you got to say, I got to go more proximal up in the body to take care of that. Question back.
How much time do you have?
Very little. They come rolling in. They're in the operating room, and I'm doing this within 15 minutes of them hitting the facility. And to do this, we can give patients tons and tons of blood and plasma and platelets and keep them going. But at some point, they sometimes go into shock because they've gotten too much to become hypothermic and different things. But you got to do this stuff within an hour. This is the golden hour of trauma surgery. And because they come right off the battlefield, you've got that hour, because they're literally 10 minutes from where they got hit, and they're at our facility. One question here. We have a CT. We had a small little, I don't know if I have a picture of it anywhere, but we had a small little x-ray machine. That's all we had. No, one of those tiny little portable x-rays, all I had. We had an ultrasound and an x-ray machine. We were a forward. Well, yeah, there's luxury things we have in the civilian world that you don't have, and they did have that at Kandahar. They had a CT down there, and they could do actually CT angiograms and stuff down there. We didn't have the luxury here.
One of my residents was there.
Yeah, Kandahar was a cakewalk. Don't tell them that, but it was a cakewalk. Okay, we lost our maxillofacial surgeon. So who gets to do maxillofacial surgery? Me, right? So here's a guy who gets shot in the face, and AK will not even show you the initial injury. It's pretty horrific, because he got through the neck, through his chest, through his face. We took teeth out of his mouth. He was going to die. He's an Afghan, actually. But we had no oral and maxillofacial surgeon. They actually left Kandahar. There was none in country. There's one in Kabul. This guy had no chance of going up there. So I took a pelvic reconstruction plate, I bent it, and I made it fit his jaw and put his jaw back together. Of course, I read my Atlas of Head and Neck Surgery just so to make sure I was doing the right thing. And I kid you not, I did. I quickly looked up there. Okay, femoral artery and vein. Okay, tie those off, do this, do that, and don't do. And so here I am operating and fixing this guy's jaw. So you just never know what you might have to do when you have no other resources and you're in a forward operating team. Occasionally you're not successful, and if anybody's familiar with medicine, this is called ventricular tachycardia and then ventricular fibrillation. And I just show you this because the injury is too horrific to see. We decided just not to resuscitate because the guy was so horribly mangled that we would have done him a disservice. So sometimes you got to make that decision. Plus the amount of resources, blood and plasma and platelets, you got to make those decisions when you have other casualties there.
Where's
So
the blood coming from?
we get the blood. It comes from blood bank from the United States through Germany. Then it comes down to Kandahar refrigerated, and then we continue to replenish ours. We typically would have about 50 units of blood, and then we would have about equivalent units of platelets, equivalent units of plasma. We did a 1-1-1 ratio. 1 blood, packed red blood cells, 1 plasma, 1 platelets. We kind of continue that infusion through what's called a Baxter infusion pump, which literally pumps because when they're coming in, they're dying. You've got to pump their vascular system up again, and you got to take tourniquets off because many times they come in with combat tourniquets strapped to them. Once you let those down, things may start bleeding again, and then you lose control. So you got to be on top of it. And anybody who knows medicine, this is the golden hour. You got to be on top of it. Question right there.
And in a situation like this, how often do you have multiple or many casualties coming in all at once? I imagine.
Not infrequently. Probably about, I can remember about 4 or 5 times where we were hit with over 5 at once. And that's triage, French term for sorting. You sort, you figure out who goes first.
Yeah.
Some are not so bad, and some are dead, and some are really badly hurt. You've got to figure out which you've got to have a life-threatening injury that you can save them, and which may have a massive brain injury, and even though they're alive, well, let's not spend a lot of time with that one. Let's go take care of the guy who's been shot through the abdomen or just was hit and has a neck fracture, but he can be stabilized. So you got to make those decisions. Question?
Has your facility ever been attacked?
This facility, we don't know. Honestly, I think there were 2 times we had incoming rockets, but they were so off the mark they never dropped into our facility. But commonly, yes. In fact, our commanding officer, his facility was overrun 3 years prior. So he was very adamant about having patrols surrounding our perimeter all the time. The only concern was a lot of those guys in our towers, they were Afghan army. And you're like, you're running by, like as you go exercise in the afternoon, you got your pistol on, you're running by, you're looking at these guys, and they got their AKs, they're watching you, like, is that guy going to just turn around and shoot me? You never know. Because about 3 years earlier, somebody did go into the Afghan side because there used to be a track on the Afghan side of the base. He was a medical personnel, used to run on that track. Well, he was running on that track, somebody came up and shot him. So you're always armed, whether you carry your M4 or whether you have your pistol. If there's going to be a gunfight, you're going to go down in a gunfight. I mean, it's not going to be one person unarmed against somebody else. So it's precarious because you have to be very sensitive. We have Jordanians who are Muslim there. We did the Muslim prayers every day, especially during Ramadan, to be sensitive to the local population so they could actually hear our surrounding broadcasts of the most horrible rendition of Allah Akbar. They should have gotten Cat Stevens to do it, to be honest with you. But it was really nauseating to hear it because it was a horrible singer. Otherwise it wasn't so bad. But it would go on, during Ramadan 5 times a day, they would play that on our base. Anyway, it'd be very sensitive because you had other services there that were Muslim. And we're in Muslim world. We're next to Kalat, which is a Muslim city.
The fact that you were taking in Afghanis, did
Yep.
that get out in terms of goodwill in the
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I have a couple of interesting cases I don't have here, but yeah, I mean, the colonel of the local police was hit by an IED, and he survived it, but he had embedded shrapnel in his chest. I'm like, just bring him on, we'll take care of him. Because of all things, you always get that family member, hey, if you know so-and-so, he's in the army, he's in Afghanistan, maybe you'll see him. Well, actually, my cousin's husband, future husband, she says he might be coming to Afghanistan. Sure enough, he shows up. Like, dude, here you are. I never met the guy in the world, and here's the future husband of one of my cousins, and we met him there. It was somebody he worked with intimately, and he said, look, we got to take care of this colonel. If you take care of him, he takes care of us. So you protect one another, and you do diplomatic medicine is what I call it. You be smart about who you treat and how you treat. We took care of a lot of other folks that the Army said, just take care of this fellow. So we did that out of goodwill, and plus because it was smart to do. Okay. This last picture is once we operate on them, they typically don't stay overnight, although if the weather goes bad, they may stay overnight, never 2, but maybe over 1 night, and then we'd have to keep our nurses up all night in the IC intensive care area in the back side of this wooden shack. But when we can, we package them back up and we ship them out on another 60. That 60 takes them down to Kandahar. They may many times go from Kandahar up to Kabul, Kabul to Landstuhl in Germany, Germany to Walter Reed. And actually we hear about our patients as they go through that transit, because there's a conference that we do every day that says, okay, you guys sent these patients up, this is how they showed up here, this is what we had to do to them, this is what you missed, if you missed anything. I don't think we missed much of anything. We were really good about that, but you would hear about it if you missed something, and they get up there and all of a sudden it's like, this guy had a spine fracture and you guys didn't have spine precautions on him. So it would happen, but thankfully it didn't happen to us. We were pretty good about it. On our time off, we had a lot of wood around, so we built a recreational deck. Some of the guys built a pool table. We put a screen up here so we could watch movies at night, and to keep ourselves occupied. And, always flying above us. If you see these things above your cities nowadays, that's people snooping in on you. This thing is amazing what the technology is that it can see going around where you are. It's got infrared cameras. It's got all kinds of scopes. It's got heat signature devices. You got these flying around base, which are the simple, the remote operated vehicles that have sensing cameras, infrared devices. And then we also had some Apaches that were in our base. They came during the summer because they moved from another base, so we had Apaches flying around too. So we might have been a nice target for somebody to hit, but you're asking for a big wall of back if you did it. And I'll show you that in a second. The weather can change. Most of the time we were there, we got there in the rainy season, so you have these rainstorms that come through real quickly, but you're talking about 105 to 110 degrees with most of the time zero humidity, especially during the summer. It gets mighty, mighty hot. These are the blast walls. If you hear the air raid siren, you're going to get behind these things just because all these stones, just like I showed you pictures of, they get aerosolized and they're flying around. You always wear eyewear, you always wear your gear, so in the event that it happens, if you're not behind one of these, you can get hit. So they tell us about it, but we didn't have a rocket hit in our base while I was there. This is us relaxing after a day's work. That's on our deck. Again, cigars were big out there, so that was kind of the fun thing. This is actually my room. It's kind of a mess. It's only a mess because I was doing the MASH thing. You're not allowed to have alcohol in Afghanistan, but what you can see here is grape juice. Yes, I made a pretty good Merlot out there. Yeah, so you sneak those things in just to give your troops a little respite. Now at night it's kind of beautiful, it's peaceful, it's quiet until all hell breaks loose because about 75 yards away we had one of these. It's a 155 millimeter howitzer. It's called the M777, and this thing, when they would fire it out every other night a couple times, almost just to tell the people, hey, the U.S. is here, don't mess with us. Sometimes they were firing on targets, but when this thing goes off, I mean, your whole world shakes. And the cannon was sort of canted in my direction, and so you'd get a heart attack in the middle of the night, unless they would say, outgoing fire, outgoing fire, outgoing fire, but sometimes they didn't. They just let off and fired one of these off, and it woke you up. It's pretty crazy, but the moons, we got to appreciate beautiful full moons out there over the razor wire and the HESCO barriers. And then again, you could communicate with home as long as the communications was open. Anytime we were hit anywhere around our area or we had casualties in country, comms would be shut down, so you couldn't communicate out of the country. But when you could communicate, they had pretty good internet access and you could do Skype. Okay, Skype was really a godsend because you could talk to your family back at home, my son, wife and daughter. I could actually spend some time actually chatting with them, which is something that the folks that maybe served in prior wars, Vietnam, Korea, and even earlier, Iraq, didn't have this luxury. So it's kind of nice to have that, the Skype thing. This is homecoming. I didn't do it in an elaborate way. I mean, it was crazy coming back because we got put on some civilian aircraft coming back because they messed up our military flights. So my little son there doesn't know what to do. He's crazy. So this is after not seeing him for 10 months, and it's like you show back up. Of course, I put this one in for my wife over here. And then you'll also see the little dog here at the end. But, so that's coming back to home after spending quite some time. Yeah, our little Boston Terrier can't get enough of her, and she's just ecstatic to see me as well. There she goes. Oh, yeah. She goes for the face all the time. But very, very loving dog. Anyway. So that's coming home, which is obviously the best part of your deployment. Then getting back to what you love to do. That's my boat, and the interesting thing is I raced it like 4 weeks ago out of San Diego Yacht Club, and I saw the list. There were about maybe 200 people signed up for the race, and I said to myself, now that Bates is back from Afghanistan, this guy named Connor is really going to have to be worried about. Yeah, Dennis was in that race. He was in a different class, but. I thought it was kind of humorous that my name was right next to his in the sign-up sheet for that race series. That's a Melgis 32. It's a really fun sport boat, super fast 32-foot boat. So my kind of lessons of life, going back to the beginning, success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life as by the obstacles which he has overcome while trying to succeed. And that's that picture of Forrest Gump kind of running out of his brace, which was me, many, many years ago. Teddy Roosevelt's quote, this one here, far better it is to dare mighty things to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much because they live in a gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat. And that, again, is looking up the open escape trunk. I didn't take that picture, but somebody did during our operation from the Los Angeles. And then my last one here, this was just 3 weeks ago in our little hometown, which is we're proud of this hometown. This is Coronado, California. If you remember, a Navy SEAL got killed in Iraq just a few weeks ago. He came to a homecoming parade, and he had his service at our church, and everybody took the day off school. This was a Friday, right? Was it Friday or what was it? It was a Friday, and so all the kids came out of school to do this. I was actually working up Camp Pendleton, so I wasn't here. My wife took these pictures. But then again, Calvin Coolidge, Amherst class of 1895, the nation which forgets its defenders will be itself forgotten. So it's very important to remember these people, especially on Memorial Day, because they serve our country, and they serve it valiantly, and they give their lives sometimes, such as this fellow right here. So that's Charles Keating IV. And again, right over here, Memorial Field, if you've never read this, well, it's there. Memorial Field is dedicated by the alumni to the Amherst men who in 2 great wars gallantly responded to their country's call. So something always to remember. And I end with this quote, which you can read on your own, and I'll ask anybody if they know whose quote this is. And the hint is it's a college professor who also won a Congressional Medal of Honor. I actually put this on a plaque. We had 3 Army guys killed in an IED attack once, and we gave them a plaque from our medical facility. We saved a few of them, but we couldn't save the guys who were too damaged, and this is what I put in the plaque. Because we're all used to the Gettysburg Address, which are, obviously lauded words, but I thought that this one really says a lot too. This, if you're not familiar with, is actually Gettysburg. Okay, so this quote is over 150 years old. When I was in Afghanistan, that was the 150th anniversary of Gettysburg, the battle. So we kind of did a little history lessons on it. And if you've been there, this area right here is called the Angle, across the field where pickets and the Virginians charged across the field here and met the Union artillery. Very famous place. Remember the copse of trees they talk about? That's what's left of the copse of trees. So anybody know who this is? Anybody remember? Okay, the next hint is that he's Bowdoin College. I think he was actually the governor of Maine too. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. He was famous at the Little Round Top. He was with the 20th Maine Division that defended Little Round Top as they try to get around the right flank, the Confederates, and he defended that hill and valiantly, and he was the one that called for the bayonet charge there, if you ever know the history of Gettysburg. But he was a professor of rhetoric. I don't know if we have professors of rhetoric anymore, but that was his professorship. But a brilliant guy that was hauled off to war during the Civil War. And if you ever seen the movie series Gettysburg, he's depicted quite well in that. But he won the Congressional Medal of Honor for his gallantry on the field there. So again, this is Memorial Day weekend, so we want to thank those who have served and those who have given the ultimate sacrifice as we go through this fun weekend. So I want to thank everybody, and I will open it up to any questions that anybody may have.
Just a comment about Keating. I don't know if you all realize his grandfather was the guy who was a terrible guy with finances, right? But he was, I remember reading a big article about it, because he was the first one killed with the last thing he'd been doing. And it was very interesting that he chose the military.
Yeah,
He was financially well off, he didn't have to do that, but he did. Young, gorgeous looking guy.
And again, that's the comment is that the senior Chuck Keating, his grandfather was one involved in the savings and loan scandal in the 80s, and he turned out to take a different path, obviously, and was a hero and gave his life in the service because he was actually going to a firefight. He was responding to call probably from CIA agents that were helping out the local population fighting ISIS, and he responded with a SEAL team to them, and that's when he got killed. Others right there.
This was really awesome, and I just wanted to say thank you for your service.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I'd like to know what in your medical training prepares you for the drastic kind of wounds. Would a big city with a high crime rate of gunshot wounds be helpful?
Yeah, I hate to say it, true, yeah. Like I trained in Cincinnati. There wasn't a lot of gun play in Cincinnati. There was enough, but there were a lot of farm injuries out there, so you get that filthy farm injury stuff. So I learned a little bit of that when I was in Cincinnati. But then I trained in New York, and we would rotate to some of the outlying hospitals, so we get some
some of that. But the thing that's different about a lot of this stuff is the filth. I mean, you can treat gunshot wounds in a hospital, but when you have the filth in conjunction with it and the massive damage from explosive devices, you can't get that training here. Although, you know, I hate to say it, but they got that in Boston here not too long ago. That was when I was in Afghanistan. Like, they're getting the same stuff in Boston that we're getting here. And it's the same kind of thing. I found it kind of paradoxical that when I was in Afghanistan, I couldn't order, like we needed nails to build some of our deck stuff. If I got onto a website and tried to get stuff sent into country, I couldn't get it because people would take anything they could buy, thumbtacks, nails, push pins. They would get that stuff from around the world. They'd pack it around these, it's called HME. They make a pseudo-explosive device basically out of fertilizer. They pack the stuff around it. Not only is it filthy, but it spews all kinds of shrapnel material. And I had some really horrific pictures that I chose not to show, where you see just the human body peppered with different stuff. And you've got to open all that stuff up. My vascular surgeon didn't have a lot of experience with it. I remember sort of criticizing him to some degree when he's doing these little tiny INDs and packing these holes. I'm like, dude, forget this. You've got to open this stuff up. You've got to open it up clean out because it's going to pus out. You've got to open it up. And you don't put any internal hardware in. That's why we use external fixators, because if you put hardware inside the body, it's going to get infected. There's only a couple times I actually did internal hardware is I had a couple motor vehicle accidents, and I was able to sort of use some of the equipment I had to do a distal humerus fracture and to do a tibia fracture, because they were closed injuries, meaning they weren't open fractures, no opening to the outside environment. So I could do it with those. But these injuries, they're filthy dirty. You've got to wash them out multiple times. So I would do the first I&D external fixator at Apache. They go down to Kandahar. They have the repeat operation, readjustment external fixator, wash it out again, debride it, meaning remove sort of dead and necrotic or damaged tissue again. And then they go to Germany, have it done again, go to Walter Reed, have it done again. And the patients that could eventually get like a rod in the long bone, that would sometimes happen at Walter Reed like a week after I saw them on the battlefront. Because they would be clean enough that they say, now we really need to stabilize it definitively and put a rod in the bone.
Where did the Afghanistan patient go?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we get a lot of Afghan patients, a lot of Afghan Army patients, and some of the civilian population. When they leave our forward operating base, there's called the Kandahar Regional Military Hospital down in Kandahar. It's not the NATO hospital where our troops go and all the NATO troops go. They go there. Now, I can tell you some pretty ridiculous experiences. I remember two of our medevac guys came back, Army medevac guys. We had a guy, we had basically had a tube in his throat. He had his abdomen opened up. It's a horrible injury. We saved his life. And when the medevac crews brought him down to Kandahar Regional Military Hospital, which shared the same airfield, the ambulance that showed up to pick him up, two guys get out. The Army guys don't want to lose their ventilator. Ventilator's a little box that basically allows to breathe for somebody when they can't breathe for themselves. But the Army's not going to let the Afghans have our ventilator, so the Afghans have to bring their own. Well, they didn't bring their own. What they did is they get there and the Army guys say, okay, take this out. Now you've got to breathe for him, so keep bagging him, right? They throw him in the back of the ambulance. The two guys get in the front and drive away. So you look at this and you're like, my God, it's a different world. And forget it if you're female. Forget it. I mean, you're not going to get any treatment beyond what we would be able to do for you. That's it. Because your life is not worth that much. So you're just disposed of. Even if you're children, and once child's damaged, that's it. You're done. So I not to disparage them. They would try to do things, but you have to understand the cultural differences and the fact that they just don't have the expertise nor the equipment that we have to really do these life-saving injuries, and then to maintain them in an intensive care setting. Just don't have that. Simply don't have that.
What's your perspective from having been there so long on the future of the country and its prospects going forward?
It's kind of dismal, because there's nothing that binds them centrally. You talk about a mixed culture. Afghanistan is so many different culture ethnicities that one part of the country is one ethnicity, and even though they may share a little bit of religious similarities, you've got people that look like Alexander the Great there, blonde hair, blue eyes. You guys look like they're Mongolian there. Then you guys that look like they're Iranian there. and they're all mixed together. So to try to kind of get them as central identity is very difficult, number one. Plus, their natural resources are such that they don't have a lot of money, right? What's the biggest thing that they export and make money on? Is heroin, okay? So, how do you build a country on heroin manufacturing and exporting? Well, you don't, okay? So they don't have a resource that they can rely on to build wealth in their country. So the whole idea of what happened here is, you'll remember we went into Afghanistan to take care of the bad guys that destroyed the World Trade Center. We weren't going in there to do a nation-building operation. That happened later. That was a NATO operation, okay? That was not just the U.S. That was multiple countries that decided, this is a good time to maybe try to settle this place down, bring order, and peace and teaching and all this back to Afghanistan. Well, it's not going as well as you would like it, put it that way.
I'm really sorry, but we're gonna have to end this program because we have another program at 2:30.
Okay.
And it's.
I'll be here. I'll walk outside if you have other questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome.